Oh yeah, now I remember. It was that damn grenade guy. I wanted to punch the hell out of him, but I couldn't reach him.
Why couldn't you reach him?
There was a ditch.
A simple ditch stopped you?
This was no mere simple ditch. It was full of tentacles and blood-stained spears that moved up and down, and bony arms that tried to grab me, and deadly lays.
Okay, Mr. Fox. I get it. You couldn't reach him. For your own good, I'll not include the spears, arms, and tentacles in my report. Now, Mr. Fox, please continue your story.
Welcome back, everyone. It's a new year, and that means new videos down the pipeline. I figured I'd start off the year with something a bit more lighthearted, given the rather depressing nature of the last two games I reviewed in December. Today, we're looking at a game that parodies one of the most dead-serious video game franchises out there, mocking everything from its well-known entries to the very originals, in both gameplay as well as writing. Now then, enough talking, it's getting redundant. This is Unmetal.
I heard something. Hey, a coin!
I ran into a guard as I went in. Luckily, the guy was sleeping. That bastard was going to have a rude awakening.
The game is presented in the modern pixel art style we're all familiar with from so many indie games that come out today. It's not really a surprise, and it's not necessarily bad. It's the easiest and cheapest art style to use for small development teams, and it can result in really beautiful art if done correctly. As far as Unmetal is concerned, though, I think it gets the job done, but that's about it. Nothing about the art is particularly notable. It's all just pretty good pixel art that just feels like art I've seen many other times before. Same goes for the sound, really. It's mostly various kinds of chiptune and other various generic video game sounds that work but aren't really anything of note. The one thing of note that I'll give the style of the game, however, is the voice acting. It's certainly not the best voice acting around, but the devs clearly knew what they were doing, as the whole thing is incredibly cheesy and stupid, and in the good way. The game, being a parody of the Metal Gear franchise, definitely wants to get as much out of its dialogue gags as possible. Having the main character overact so hard, you can be sure he eats his daily gravel first thing in the morning, amongst various other jokes the game is constantly throwing at you. In fact, these dialogue gags actually affect the gameplay. Since the game is the main character recalling a story about how he had to recall a story to a guy, you're occasionally prompted to decide things such as who or what was in a certain room or what someone was holding. Or, in the case of the trash monster boss fight, deciding how hard the fight will be by deciding how many tentacles it has, with the game throwing curveballs at you by making your decisions something of a monkey's paw wish. With all this talk of dialogue, however, why don't we get into the story?
And that thing had tentacles?
Well, now that you mention it, it had 24 tentacles.
The story itself is another part of this game that I would describe as being serviceable, even though it's not really exceptional. The story is about a man named Jesse Fox, a Solid Snake parody that was imprisoned in a secret military base on wrongful charges. He manages to get out of his cell after tricking the guard, and thus begins his escape as well as the beginning of the game itself. The game is told through Jesse Fox recalling the story to a military officer, which in itself is actually Jesse Fox recalling what he told to the officer to his wife during a car ride, meaning that details tend to get muddled, and Jesse's story, which is the game itself, is not exactly the most reliable when it comes to fully detailing what was actually there. For instance, you could go dead serious and mention how there were a bunch of rats in the sewers, or you can make Jesse go on a rant about hordes of mutant squirrels trying to eat him like a human-sized acorn, thus changing up the game into something a bit more silly. The game is constantly trying to throw various gags at you, making fun of pretty much everything in Metal Gear to ensure that something will get at least a chuckle out of you at some point. The game rarely lets up on this in the hopes that you'll laugh eventually, and I'll admit some of them did get me a little. I didn't really feel myself laugh necessarily, but I chuckled a good few times throughout. Maybe a more dedicated Metal Gear fan will find this game funnier than I do, since I only have a mild understanding of the franchise. Speaking of Metal Gear, how about the gameplay?
This is Jesse Fox. Over.
This is the doctor. Over.
What? Doctor? But how?
How is the escape going?
Just fine. Trying to find a way out of this building.
Well, my access card won't work. It's only clearance level 2. Leaving the building requires level 3 clearance.
Where would I find that?
The officers would have them. Their offices are on the 3rd floor.
Wow. Thanks for the help. I didn't know you cared about me.
What I care about is that you leave ASAP so I stop getting so many patients.
By the way, what's your name?
My name is Doctor. Over and out.
Unmetal is designed to play like an old-school Metal Gear game, the 2D Metal Gear games that started before the franchise turned into Metal Gear Solid. You move from zone to zone, taking out guards and sneaking around various traps and level obstacles, using the items you find around the level and combining them to solve a variety of problems presented to you, that sort of thing. It's not really that hard, because it's really just a vector for more of the jokes. The game uses these basic mechanics to make more jokes in one way or another. Like how if you combine the used cigarette with the gas can, you immediately explode, or how you're not actually allowed to kill anyone in the game. If you shoot someone with the pistol later on, you're required to run back to the guy you shot and bandage his wounds so he doesn't die, since the main character is actually highly averse to killing people despite looking and seemingly acting like some hardened commando. Aside from just the jokes though, the gameplay isn't really much to talk about. It's a simple gameplay system, it's based off of really old Metal Gear games, and it works for what it is, but that's really about it. It's just a good parody of the Metal Gear franchise in general.
I noticed a few abandoned crates that were thirsty for some punch. They seemed easy to reach. That is, until the containers started to drop.
And those are my thoughts on Unmetal in general. It's not exactly the most gripping game out there, but it's a fairly entertaining game for what it is. And I imagine actual Metal Gear fans would get more out of this game than I did. Still, I think we all needed some light, jokey material to start the year off after the pretty heavy and depressing experience that was all of December with Metro. This has been TheRatMan, and I will see you all later.